Hello class and Dr. Sanchez. I'm going to discuss the 360-degree feedback system as part of my graduate research project for human resource management. The purpose of this presentation is to describe the 360-degree review system and how it might apply to the Chief Executive Officer. I've read multiple peer-reviewed journals and articles associated with the 360-degree rating system. The list of these can be found in the reference section of this presentation. In many cases, once the CEO reaches the pinnacle of their business, they can start to become disengaged. Granted, they have power lunches and business dinners, but everybody stops talking when they walk into the company break room. This article will address whether a multi-source rating system, such as the 360-degree feedback, can inspire accountability and prevent upper-level executives from becoming socially disengaged and ethically corrupt. The traditional review system is between the manager and the reviewee. As you can see in the picture, the manager and the reviewee. The 360-degree feedback system includes not just the manager, but also the peers, the subordinates, and in some cases, the customers and vendors can be involved in the process. The 360-degree feedback is typically done using a questionnaire which allows the reviewer to state their opinion as to how often the reviewee demonstrates competency or skills in a particular category. The manager reviews the results and then guides the employee to develop action plans to either advance their strengths and minimize their weaknesses. It is an interesting point of debate as to whether the leaders should focus on their strengths or their weaknesses for improvement. Studies have shown that out of 24,657 leaders who participated in a 360-degree feedback study, most of them improved their strengths into the 90th percentile, but only improved their weaknesses into the 50th percentile. Focusing on the strengths or weaknesses of an employee is certainly something to consider in the overall company strategy. Even if this process is not required by the company, the 360-degree feedback can help a person who feels that some constructive input will help them in their career advancement. If it is required by the company, this process can get derailed if the reviewee is singled out by management. This is especially detrimental if the management is using this tool so they personally do not have to confront this individual. It is important for the survey to be structured so that it has a good balance of both negative and positive feedback scenarios without any extremes considered. The purpose of this tool is to benefit the employee and not hurt their feelings to the point where they leave the company. I interviewed a physical therapist about this 360-degree feedback tool, and she said that the results of this can be disastrous, especially for a small office. She immediately recalled a situation where two employees worked in tandem, bullying another employee. And the 360-degree feedback was just another catalyst for that tandem to demean their prey. She also said that the problem with a small office is that it is hard to be anonymous, so people start suspecting who gave them their review. Quite a few years back, I took Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People course. The course included an assessment form which I handed out to my peers, leaders, and subordinates. This was not called 360-degree feedback system at the time, but that's essentially how I used it. The results, of course, were anonymous, and all the reviews were positive except for one. I had just hired a young man, which we will call Tom. I spent a great deal of time with Tom trying to help him get settled, since there was no formal onboarding plan in place. I was into fitness to such extremes that I rode my bicycle to work every day. Tom was not very fit, so I tried to encourage him to join me at the gym. Tom was not interested in working out, and I know now that he took my helpful encouragement as insulting. I'm sure Tom was the one negative assessment, but I felt like it was the most beneficial. I realized that my treatment of him was unethical, and I would likely not have realized it without the feedback. This feedback system forced a level of accountability on me, and it caused me to wonder if this system would work with all levels within a company. The term, "it is lonely at the top," is a true statement, mainly because people at a certain level no longer have accountability. When I was a young engineer, I received an award for improving a factory process. The gift was a nice dinner for me and my wife, along with the CEO and his wife. In the course of the dinner conversation, I asked the CEO when he first realized he was in charge. The CEO said without hesitation, when I walked into the room and everybody stopped talking. The CEO understood this was part of being a leader, which is actually quite sad, and probably why so many high-level executives get into trouble. They're all alone and are only accountable to the board of directors. I admit I made a mistake trying to fix my young protege, Tom, who I realized later did not want or need to be fixed. But now I have a theory that the 360-degree feedback will encourage ethical behavior among executives. I truly believe that the 360-degree accountability will make the CEO more transparent, because the periodic 360-degree review will make it apparent that their actions are actually seen. The transparency would cause the executive to think twice before making questionable decisions. I also theorize that this level of transparency will encourage ethical behavior. "I'll know it when I see it" is a line made famous in 1964 by the Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart when trying to define pornography. Similarly, morality and ethics is not easy to define because it can vary between countries, religions, and even generations. The desire here is not to define morality. The desire is to propose that the 360-degree feedback system will encourage ethical behavior among executives through accountability and transparency. Honest inputs from reviewees can certainly be done under the idea that they do not need to define immorality, because they just know it when they actually see it. It is then up to the person reviewing the results to determine how valid the inputs are. This slide is meant to give an idea who reviews the CEO at the highest level of the company. You notice the CEO in the upper left-hand corner. In a typical publicly traded organization, the CEO reports to the board of directors and the chairman. The C-suite of officers, VPs, and directors technically report to the CEO, but for the 360-degree feedback, they will be considered peers. The vendors and customers are important, so involving them in the 360-degree review process can give value to the organization. The selection of workers and managers should also be involved in the review process. I placed each group of reviewers in proximity to their relationship with the CEO. It may go without saying that they form a circular pattern around the reviewee. The board of directors and the chairman will be the top level of the 360-degree review. They will have the most information about the financial performance of the CEO. The C-suite of officers, VPs, and directors should be involved with more of the day-to-day operations of the company and will therefore be the peers in the review process. I anticipate they will have the best opportunity to be the truth tellers, and everybody needs a truth teller in their life. The high-level customers are very important to the success of the organization, and the CEO will most likely interface with them often. They will have important inputs and reside in the 360-degree circle, someplace between the peers and the board of directors. A selection of workers and managers should also be involved in the review process. But the risk is that they may not be aware of all the decisions the CEO has to make in private. The CEO is less likely to interface very often with the vendors, but of course that depends on how the company is structured. Peter Marty, the author of The Anatomy of Grace, proposes that the 360-degree feedback system can be a good tool to keep pastors accountable. It is interesting to note that of the three most historic and honored professions, law, medicine, and ministry, ministry is the one that does not have practitioners overseeing what they do. Physicians must pass a certification exam every 7 years. Attorneys must take continuing education and other requirements set forth by the Supreme Court Commission. Most parishioners do not see the internal works of the church other than Sunday sermon. If they walk away Sunday morning feeling good, then they are sure the pastor is doing an honorable job. Some pastors do not even consider it a job. They consider it a calling. The nature of the calling means that the pastor gets affirmation, but not really constructive feedback. I am a Christian and a member of a non-denominational church. When I was a member of the church board, I was able to see firsthand how this church shows accountability toward both the offering and the clergy. The senior pastor is accountable to the board, but he also is involved with an accountability group consisting of a Christian counselor and another pastor. He has been involved with this group of truth tellers for over 25 years and at times mentions some topic that they challenge him with. I do not think all churches are as accountable as mine, so maybe if the 360-degree feedback can work for church pastors, it can work for corporations also. This picture represents the idea that the CEO is better when they're engaged with people around them. This is in comparison to the previous slide where the CEO was on the mountaintop all alone. I've not found a specific study which will definitely prove that the multi-source rating system can inspire accountability and prevent upper-level executives from becoming socially disengaged and ethically corrupt. But I can attest to the fact that the best leaders that I know have surrounded themselves with truth tellers who will let them know if they are veering off from an ethical course. I know that it is important to not only be a mentor, but also important to be mentored. Both directions of mentoring create strong accountability. I work as an accounting tutor 1 day per week, and occasionally there is that one student who requests information about life, work, savings, and investments. These are all topics that do certainly keep me humble, especially when they come back every week with more questions. I am at the stage of life where I have mentors younger than me and I have mentees older than me. The trust that people have in me certainly does influence many of the decisions I make on an hourly basis. I remember as a kid when I did something wrong, using the excuse, well, Mark did it first. Mark was the leader of the neighborhood and most likely my mother's biggest nightmare. I also remember my mother saying, if Mark jumped off a cliff, would you jump too? Of course, she didn't really want an answer to that. Organizations are a lot like my mother. They do not want leaders using their power to the point where they can literally lead others off a cliff. It is a shame that ethics has to be legislated when the Sarbanes-Oxley Act was created to prevent publicly traded companies from performing unethical acts, along with anti-retaliation provisions to keep followers from going over the cliff. Here are some of the limitations in using the 360-degree feedback system. First of all, anonymity. The anonymity is one of the best features of the rating system because it will encourage reviewers to be honest without fear of repercussion. If the group is very small, then it is very difficult to make the system anonymous. Non-confrontation. Management is using this tool so that they personally do not have to confront the individual. It's not a good system for that. Biased survey. The survey must be structured so that it has a good balance of both negative and positive feedback scenarios without any extremes considered. Avoiding factions. Management needs to monitor against factions ganging up to make the reviewee look bad. Curated results. A coach or neutral party should be available to evaluate the results without censorship. Deceit is really hard to identify because an innocent person can appear to be guiltier than a deceitful person, mainly because a deceitful person is, well, deceitful. Debates continue after the multi-source feedback system should be used just for leadership development or should it be used for performance evaluation. I personally do not think it can be the only method of performance evaluation unless all the limitations can be eliminated. I have been guilty of jumping to conclusions without all the facts, and it typically did not end well for me. Similarly, jumping to conclusions when being involved in a 360-degree rating system can certainly impact the ratings. Here are a few scenarios of jumping to conclusions without all the facts. Let's say you're in the break room and the CEO is getting coffee. And you say, "Hi," but he does not respond. So you go around telling your friends and everybody starts talking about how unfriendly the CEO is. Where in actuality, the CEO wears a hearing aid, and that morning it was malfunctioning, so he did not even hear you say anything. Another example is the CEO is only out for himself because he laid off my friend. Well, in actuality, the company is having financial difficulty, and temporary adjustments are critical to keep the company from shutting down completely and losing many more jobs. There are many cases of disconnect where if the truth was obvious, then it would completely shift the paradigm. Using subordinates in rating the CEO can have limitation issues. The rater's judgment may be skewed because they cannot have full access to the same information as the CEO. Jumping to conclusions without all the facts, along with other limitations I previously mentioned, certainly can be a problem. But many of these limitations can be minimized if the company, especially the CEO, does a better job communicating. I have been in an audience listening to speakers who had amazing voices and a commanding presence. Afterward, people would ask me what the message was, and I would say, I have no idea, but I sure enjoyed the delivery. This is a case where communication has not taken place because the meaning of the message was not understood. Communication means delivery, listening, and comprehension. And I'll explain each one. Delivery. The company can deliver a message in many ways. It can be done face-to-face in meetings. It can be done by email. It can be done with the company website. You can put up posters and send out flyers. Or you can do texting to each employee. Listening. There is a difference between hearing and listening. Your ears just sit on your head, passively hearing sounds. Listening requires actively engaging the brain to comprehend the information. Listening is a process that takes cognitive ability and is a learned skill that requires full attention. Listening also involves reading nonverbal cues along with vocal inflections. Comprehension. Comprehension means to deduct meaning, and each human can deduct meaning differently based on their culture, their language, their values, their beliefs, attitudes, expectations, and intentions. As I mentioned earlier, immorality is hard to describe, but you will know it when you see it. This is the same for unethical behavior and sexual harassment. The best way to teach these topics is to give examples and discuss them openly with the class. Communication about moral awareness by discussing what is ethical and desired behavior can reinforce positive traits among an organization. I remember many years ago going to Austin, Texas with my wife for a long weekend. The Budweiser girls were at the grand opening of a bar and grill, and I got a signed 3.5-inch picture of them. I put it on my desk when I returned to the office on Monday, and one of the managers referred to it as a form of sexual harassment. The girls in the photo were wearing one-piece swimsuits, so I never thought of it as harassment. I innocently just thought it was a cool photo from a fun weekend with my wife. This changed my paradigm about what can be offensive to others, and I have been cognizant of it ever since. Similarly, organizations that openly discuss what is deemed honest and moral in contrast to what is dishonest and immoral should be able to create an environment where all employees, from the line workers down to the CEO, can prevent moral disengagement. My mother always taught me to open the door for ladies and to give up a seat on a bus. I automatically do that today, and I consider this moral behavior. My wife and I were in Eureka Springs, Arkansas last weekend. We got on the trolley along with a group of very religious-looking people that were all dressed similarly. The men had long beards and they wore matching gray vests, and the women had their hair in buns and wore long gray dresses. I assume this group had their own version of morals, but not one of them, young or old, gave their seat to a pregnant woman who got on the trolley after us. I realize it is not fair for me to say this whole group is morally disengaged because they have not fulfilled what my mother taught me. But this is an example of why these topics can be difficult to explain and should be discussed openly. The 360-degree feedback is not just for others to do the reviewing. The reviewee should also spend time doing self-evaluation. Knowing more about yourself can help you in understanding some of the decisions you make. There are various assessment tests you can take, such as Myers-Briggs, which can help you in categorizing your personality tendencies. There are tests that can categorize your leadership traits between charismatic or transformational. Both charismatic and transformational leaders have the ability to inspire followers through spoken and written words. The charismatic leader is set apart from the transformational leader by oratorical excellence. I would say that Clarence B. Jones is a transformational leader since he actually wrote the I Have a Dream speech for Dr. Martin Luther King. But Dr. King is a charismatic leader because he turned those written words into one of the greatest speeches in the 20th century. The Big Five personality traits profile can help people understand their leadership traits. The 5 characteristics are conscientiousness, open to experience, surgency, adjustment, and agreeableness. I'll explain more about these traits and how they can fit into specific job classifications next. There are many articles written on the Big Five traits, so I'll not go into them here. I do think it is worth noting that high surgency is ranked first among the 3 job classifications I have listed. Surgency is basically that desire to be in charge, and not everyone has that drive. I also find it interesting that conscientiousness is listed second, which might help when trying to reinforce moral or ethical guidelines upon a person of high surgency. One of the most beneficial assessments that I have taken was in determining what my tendencies are toward conflict management. This is a great evaluation because it considers others and self. Notice in the slide that integrating, compromising, and dominating all require engaging with others, where obliging and avoiding is more individual. This assessment is also clever in that it is done in perspective of other people. I did the assessment considering my wife and my best friend, Rob. You will see on the next page my results and how they were categorized. It is important to take the assessment quickly so that your first thought is your answer. The conflict management assessment has 2 categories: concern for others, or cooperativeness, is along the vertical axis, and concern for self, or assertiveness, is along the horizontal axis. Notice that the integrating style is the most collaborative style for initiating, responding to, and mediating a conflict resolution. I loaded the questions into a spreadsheet so that I could enter the values quickly without giving much thought. I think it is accurate that integrating is high for both my wife and my friend Rob. We all know each other very well, and I am both compromising and assertive around them. This means that I care about them, but I also care about myself when I'm around them. These are both very important in a relationship. I did a similar test for my boss at Richland College, and her results were also very accurate. I think it's a good test. In conclusion, I want to thank each of you for listening, and I hope you'll consider using a multi-source feedback tool in your business. I've pointed out how the 360-degree feedback works, along with some of the limitations. I have not found a specific article that tested the accountability of the CEO by using a multi-source review system. But I've pointed out some things that the company can do to reinforce ethical behavior within the company from the top down, and a multi-source review system can certainly be one important aspect. I pointed out the importance of communication within the company, including direct communication from the CEO. I also pointed out that it is important to also know yourself in terms of personality profiles, personality traits, and conflict management style. Thank you very much for listening, and God bless.